Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of GeekVerse podcast. I am your host, Mr. Field, today, and I'm going to be reviewing a film that just came out called The Invitation. But before I get into that, a couple of plugs. You can find us in the search bar. GeekVerse.ca is our home base. GeekVerseCast is our Twitter. GeekVerse on our Facebook. You can find us on our Patreon. We get ad-free, exclusive, early content available there. Whole bunch of retrospectives are just popping off right now. In celebration of the Rings of Power show dropping on Amazon, we have the Lord of the Rings retrospective that is available early on our Patreon, and the Hobbit retros as well. I believe they dropped on our main feeds. And aside from that, we got, again, a whole plethora of shows that are just popping off. We have the House of the Dragon that me and Kirklin are reviewing every Sunday night. That'll be dropping tonight, probably, actually, because it is Sunday. We have She-Hulk that's popping off Wednesdays. As soon as the show releases, we're watching it and we're just popping online to review it. And then we have Andor that's coming later. Is it September? I think it's September. Yeah, we're already at the end of this month, so it's not the end of this month, but that'll be coming up soon. Aside from that, we have, again, just reviews popping off left, right, and center. We got news that's dropping all the time, so you can find us all over our main feeds with your internet connection. And yeah, I think that pretty much just covers it all. So I'm just going to dive right into this. Non-spoilers first, of course. Now, this movie, sorry, it caught my interest because when I believe I was seeing Nope, the trailer for this played, and I was watching Nope with Travis, and the trailer popped, and I thought, okay, this is interesting. I like a good vampire film. Now, the trailer did show a lot, and that was one of the cons that Travis had with this, and it didn't deter me at all because I thought, okay, trailers, they do show a lot these days, but maybe, just maybe, there's some essence to it that's not being revealed, a bigger plot at hand. And in the way I saw it, it delivered in that front. The trailer didn't reveal everything. It unfortunately should have kept a component secret. I agree with that, but it was definitely something that was exciting and thrilling, and I quite enjoyed it. So if I were to sum it up, and I told my wife this because I took her along to come see it with me, I labeled this movie as like a Ready or Not meets Twilight. And if you, I imagine you've seen both of those. I like both those films a lot. So for me, this film really managed to stand out in a way that I quite enjoyed, and it did certain things that really were up my alley. Looking at how it's done at the box office, it's obviously not going to be breaking any records or standing the test of time, but that's okay because this is definitely well, that's not okay. It should, a movie should do that. That's what a goal of a movie, to just boom, just dominate and just, reel in the crowds. And I wish that could be the case for this movie, but I guess it's just not everyone's cup of tea. It's certainly my cup of tea. I come from a background where I love the films like Underworld and all that. So vampires, they definitely speak to me. Van Helsing. And I feel like that there are people that may pass up on this film that really should give it a try. And then they'll probably see it later on, maybe years down the road, and think, oh, I wish I saw this sooner. It actually wasn't too bad. But I digress. For me, it was a good time. I thoroughly enjoyed this film, seeing it in theaters, and it had just a good level of mystery, intrigue, and it didn't butcher it or anything like that within the first act. I feel like it really picked up at that beginning. It got to the middle, and the ending, just, it delivered for me. I would have liked it to have been a little bit something different, but I liked what they did with it, and for the ending specifically, it stood on its own. I'm trying to think what else I could say though about it. I mean, it didn't feel like a long movie going in. It had a strong start in my opinion, but not, when I say like it didn't feel like a long movie, I say that not in a boring way. Like, oh, it's just like it went by so quickly. Like, I'm butchering how I'm trying to say that. I say that it went by quickly, I don't mean like, oh, it's a flawless movie. Like, it just was like snap, like you're having fun, time flies, right? No, I think that it was very steady, and it set out to do what it was trying to do with its beginning, middle, and end. And in the essence of developing its characters, I like that, again, it didn't spill it or show its hand too early, and it let you kind of try and figure out these things as it was progressing forwards, which I really liked and appreciated. it just had a good level of mystery to it, sprinkled in with some good horror vibes. So yeah, I'm trying so hard to just to beat around the bush and not say anything spoilers wise, because I feel like there's a lot spoilers wise that I could just to get into. But without further ado, I'm going to jump to a quick ad break here before we get into our spoilers portion. So we'll be back in 3, 2, 1. And we're back. So we're going to get into some spoilers now. And again, if you haven't seen this movie, go see it, but we're in it. So right off the hop, we have our main character, the I hope I'm saying this right, Nathalie Emmanuel, and she plays Evie, and she's from Game of Thrones, and she's from the Fast franchise. I didn't even realize she was actually from the Dark Crystal: Age of Resistance as well. It popped off on Netflix. So great actress. I love the projects that she's in, and when she's in here, she basically has no family really kicking around, and she wants to reach out and see who's available, who's related to her. So she caters, and one of the events she was catering, they partake in a DNA test kind of thing, and she got one of these DNA test kits from the company that specializes in the DNA testing that she was catering the event for and all that. So she does the test, and then she finds out, hey, I have relatives in the UK. So she meets up with one who's like her cousin, sees the family tree, and then they invite her out to a wedding. She goes out there, all seems great. She's out there, and then I like when things start to kind of subtlety. Things are very subtle and going awry. Where you look at the maids, and the maids all have numbers on them, and you think, okay, that's very peculiar. Just a number. Later on, you kind of can interpret, at least my perspective, it's numbered like cattle, so to speak. There's no reason to put a name on something you're going to kill, or someone, I should say. In this case, that's the point with the maids. Now, as much as they're to clean, they're there to be food as well. And so Evie arrives there, and she's got a great friend back home that she's kind of keeping in contact with. But she gets there, and she meets the lord of the manor, and his name is, I believe it was Walter. And Thomas Doherty, I believe is his name. I thought he was fan-freaking-tastic. He was charismatic as heck, and like, god damn, like, fantastic, fantastic. I loved him in this movie. I'm not sure what else he's actually done, but this is definitely my first experience with him. So that being said, Evie arrives, meets him, is shown around by her cousin, everything like that. Seems great, just popping off. And then you meet none other than Mr. Field. Not me, but the Mr. Field who is basically the head house servant gentleman, head of the house, I guess, the upkeep of it. And he's such a prick. And that's one of the things that I probably really enjoyed about this movie too, is just the references and these things. Like, my wife looked at me and started laughing because, yeah, it was like, oh, that's Mr. Field. Just don't mind him. He's a bit crockety. Just thinking, shit, now I got a guy named after me here. This is just great. So he turns out to be very much in cahoots with the very sinister things that are going on in this house. Now, Evie notices some things. She wakes up in the middle of the night. She's got her own like private maid who's trying to like accommodate her, help her. And she notices things are kind of going a little sideways. And when you walk out and you see all these maids that are numbered in the hallway downstairs, and it's like 3 a.m. It's very peculiar. So unfortunately, one of those maids does not make it out, goes into the library, which Evie was told not to go into. And the maid goes in there, and it was a great tense build-up scene of her just getting killed. And this cemented it in from, okay, the vampires. This is what's going on. They're killing. Because when you watch the trailer, Travis mentioned, like, oh, it could have been just a cult that just is like drinking blood and doing all this stuff. But, this is a moment, okay, vampiric. When I say vampiric, I could have thought like, well, without like the whole notion of the trailer and everything, like I just kind of spearheaded my thoughts like, okay, yeah, it's a vampire. But then I thought, man, what if it actually is a werewolf? Because it could totally work in that sense too. Needless to say, it's definitely a vampire. And we learn that there's more than one. And the trailer insinuates that this whole family is vampires. All of them are. But then you learn that it's much more specific than that. Everyone is human. You're just dealing with a select few that are vampiric. And Evie comes to realize this, and you start to clue in with how everyone is reacting to certain people. Now, Evie is gets in over her head as she kind of progresses further and further, and she starts to fall for Walter because he's exceedingly charming, and it just kind of progresses further and further. And this is where, again, I'm glad that it wasn't just her going on this adventure, like digging and digging and digging. It was just her being tricked, and she found certain things that were kind of like, oh, like I was being looked into, which makes sense because Walter justifies it like, hey, I didn't want to make sure you weren't taking advantage of me and just staying here because I'm rich and everything like that. So she 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 gets that justification from him when she finds like screenshots of her Facebook page and stuff like that. But he he's just so exceedingly charming that his plan is to rope her in to actually like be with her. And it gets to a point where she's like, okay, are we gonna get married? That's what he pitches to her, just like jokingly, and she just kind of like throws it off the back of her shoulder, like, oh yeah, let's do it. He's a very literal man, obviously, in his position, and she was just like, oh, I'm just kidding, right, Walt? Doesn't clue in with Walter because obviously he's got other intentions that he's gonna follow suit in. And I mean, before I get into that whole component, things that kind of lead up to this final dinner, you could say, with Walter and all the families and Evie. She's treated very good when she arrives and everything like that. She's treated very kindly by some of the family members. How they say that they're doing a wedding, but the wedding is really misdirect for Walter's intentions, just to have Evie show up here because this is such a very important thing. And this whole event is pretty much dedicated to the fact that Evie is here. When Evie arrives, you see, okay, like the Alexanders that are my family, there's no other female ones here. It's all male heirs. And that's another thing, like, okay, there's something off about that when she enters a room and they're all like praising her. And then you see the other families where you meet like Lucy, you meet Victoria, which are two other very prominent women that are just really fixated on Evie and very obsessed with Walter. And Lucy's definitely the nicer one, and then Victoria is just absolutely like villainous. And then after we have like a very like our first like night party kind of ceremony, that's when you really get to meet Lucy and Victoria, and you see Victoria being very evil. And then the next time you see her, she's full vampiric mode. And I love this scene a lot because she was just the way it was filmed was so cool in terms of a vampire. She's just like standing in the doorway and stuff like that. They play with certain things that I always love when films do this, when they show you something that could be a person standing in a dark area of a room, and then the light comes on and it's not, and then later on they insinuate it again and you think, oh shit, there is something there this time. I love when they do that. It's nothing grand, but in terms of a cinematic aspect, it always just tickles my fancy when horror movies can pull that off. And they did a little bit of that in here. But anyways, Victoria was just absolutely pissed off about Evie. Like, oh yeah, you want to be with my Walter here? I don't think so. So there's another sequence where like Evie's in this grand luxurious bed, and you look up and it's one of those ones with like a little bit of a, I guess, like a loft where the lining is draped over the top of the bed, and you just see these long vampiric hands. I'm doing a reenactment on the video feed right now if you're curious, but she's like walking, and you just see the claws, and then the claws like stop and like just pull together. It was just so freaky, so freaking freaky. And she like zips under her bed, she's freaking out and stuff. And then Walt zooms in and comes to the aid. And again, I love the chemistry. And again, I'm just gonna say it now, Walter is a vampire. Okay, there it is. And that's why I love the chemistry so much, because he's so bloody charismatic as a vampire. And his character starts to make me think that I would be a good vampire now too, because I'll get to that later. And my wife would probably agree with me on this too. But yeah, he shows up and he's just so, again, charismatic, and he's so charming, and he just stays the night with her and just keeps her safe. And I love their relationship forming. It was really, really fantastic. Victoria was obviously less than thrilled, but the next day she invites her out to, hey, let's go get our nails done, spa day. So they go, and uh, Evie gets her nails done, and the lady actually like snips a little bit of her finger with a little bit of blood. And that whole sequence of how they filmed that, again, that was highlighted in the trailer, but it was very, very freaky. just the way that it was shot, like of like her nails being filed down, and then just like snip, snip, snip of certain. I'm not sure all the finger terms, but your cuticles, I believe it is. So the way that the shots were done with the sound effects were just really like nails on a chalkboard for me, because it's building up and you have that anticipation like, okay, something's gonna happen. Yeah, like snip a little bit and a little bit of blood comes out, and Victoria is like there, is like sucky on the finger and just loves the blood, and Evie's like, what the fuck's wrong with you, and just gets out of there. So she storms off, and this is when you really get a little bit more insight into like, you don't really know who we are, Evie, as a family, and what are your intentions? Would you ever marry or anything like that? So they kind of put down their foot a little bit more in the doorway of what's really going on. Now, Evie is still on board with things, and she decides to snoop around. This is again when she finds the Facebook documents and everything in Walter's library study. While she's in there, she takes the documents, she runs back to her room, she starts packing to leave. Walter storms in and justifies himself, like I mentioned prior, and they end up having vigorous sex, and she decides to stay. And this is when Walter's like, hey, we want to get married, and she's like, yeah, let's do it. He's like, okay. And she's like, I'm just kidding, right? And he's just like, ha ha ha, and then he leaves. And then she comes to dinner that night, and you see all the families, her cousin, the Alexanders, all that stuff, and it's all just a big shindig. She's got a great red dress, as you can see in the thumbnail. And he is put on this whole show, all this food and everything like that. And then he's like, okay, you know what, Evie, like, indulge me. I'm going to make a toast here and stuff like that. And this is when you learn, okay, the wedding that was planned wasn't for someone else. It was actually for Walter and Evie, because now he's announcing that they're getting married. She's like, you're embarrassing me. What do you think you're doing? This isn't happening. And then all of a sudden they pull one of these maids out, and Mr. Field like pushes her head down and just slits her neck open, and blood starts coming out into some big bowl of punch. And then that's when it clicks, like, okay, we knew Victoria was, but then it clicks like, okay, Lucy is as well. And now we realize, oh shit, Walter. At this time, we knew there was at least 2 vampires, because with the maids, one goes into Walter's office, and this insinuates that Walter was a vampire because Walter gets his food. And then we see, okay, there's 2 vampires down in the wine cellar when 2 more maids go down there. And we see, okay, so there's at least 2 that we know of. You could have easily interpreted it as one of the ones from Walter's office being down in the wine cellar as well. So this confirms that there's 3. And now we start to learn that Walter needs to have a wife from each of these 3 families, the Alexanders, which is Evie is from, and then the one that Lucy's from, and the one Victoria is from. And when the 3 wives are together, then that means that with Walter, they will all have immortality, live forever, and all the like the perks and the benefits, super strength, as long as Walter is alive. Now, Victoria was the first wife, and she was with him for about 500 years. Lucy was about 100 years. And now we have Evie. So this is when she's like, no, fuck that. I'm out. They just killed this maid. I'm going. And she's trying to run away. It's not working. They chain her up downstairs, and they bring her a maid. And she's like, no, like, don't hurt her. Don't hurt her. So they're like, Victoria's like, okay, we're going to save this maid for later on when you want to get, or not when you want, when we force you to change for your wedding ceremony. So they lock her in a coffin. It's very, very unfortunate. But they also divulge, like, hey, they're trying to convince her, at least Lucy's trying to convince her, like, hey, it's not that bad to become a vampire. There's so many misconceptions. Like, we can actually walk in the daylight. That's a big thing. You get to never age. You have superhuman strength. You get all these benefits and stuff like that. Really doesn't sound that freaking bad. I mean, I'll tell you my vampiric pitch that I told Madison at the end of the show, but I digress. So she's in this, and she gets freed early the next day by her personal maid lady. And then the maid lady is like, yeah, like I was, oh gosh, was it your mother? I can't remember. One of her family members, I believe maybe it was her mother or maybe grandmother, but like, yeah, I was good friends with her, and it's just very unfortunate what happened. I'm just gonna try to help you get out. So she does. and Evie's on the run. Mr. Field is chasing her down, going to town trying to find her. She almost successfully gets away. Like she gets off the property and she hides in town, which she reaches out to like this village guy and his wife, and they try to pretend like they're helping her, and then she clues in. And this is another unfortunate thing in the trailer which spoiled it, but she like sees in the little in their kitchen that they have a photo of them with Walter and Mr. Field and all that. It's like, oh shit, these people are clearly in on the vampiric secret. So they called Mr. Walter, and Walter sends the goon squad, and they basically take her back. She wakes up in Walter's office now, and this is where I I swear I'm not a villain, but I like the same music that villains always listen to. Because Walter starts to put on, oh gosh, I can't even remember the name of the track now all of a sudden. He puts on a specific song, and I have it on my Spotify playlist. Here we go. Vivaldi, The Four Seasons, the Violin Concerto. Absolutely fantastic track. I love this one so much. It just really gets, it feels the emotion so hard. And sure enough, he plays it. I just start like biting my lip because I play this track so many times, and my wife hears me play it all the time. And I'm like, here we are. We got this bloody vampire, and he's just blasting the same music I love. So I swear I'm not a villain, and this keeps happening because even in a film like Ready or Not, you have the main goon who's driving the car and he's blasting his orchestra symphonic music, and he's just like just jiving to it. And I do the same thing. It must be a significant villain trait, and unfortunately, it's just stereotyping me now as who I am. But I digress. So Walter's using this kind of music to fuel the scene, and he's telling Evie about everything, like how old he is and all the benefits of being a vampire, and just giving us a lot of filler into the context we've been missing so far. And so with that, it leads to the wedding where she is basically gowned, everything like that. Everyone is just all attending, and she needs to drink his blood. And then she needs to make her first kill and drink a victim's blood, and then she'll become full vampire, and then everything will be all perfect in Walter's life. So she goes to suck his blood, and I love this because it just feels like, okay, we're getting badass here. This is where I feel we've had other moments of Ready or Not, but this is where it really felt like, okay, we're kicking ass. And she sucked his blood, and he's feeling like super like weakish and slumped to the side, and she just goes full power mode, god mode. I loved it. It was super hype, and she just goes to town. She starts blasting fire, and she just goes full vampiric, and she takes this candle, which again they foreshadow a lot of cool little things. She takes the candle that has a metal pike in it, from which the candle can sit on and everything like that. And she just like jabs it right in this guy's chest, and unfortunately missed his heart, but still planted a major killing blow. And then she has to deal with the wives now. So she goes and runs off, and she saves this maid that was going to be her first victim, runs off and gets to the foyer. And now we're dealing with the other wives. Victoria comes swooping in, just goes to town. They're fighting, and then all of a sudden, Lucy, the other wife, comes in and starts going to town on Victoria. So we think, okay, like this is great to see Lucy kind of redeeming herself. Doesn't agree with all this. Ends up spearing both her and Victoria on the metal concrete spear of this statue. Very dangerous statue to have, this dragon on top of a knight with a spear. Like, if you trip in this house, you're dying probably because of how many dangerous artistic artifacts are around, but I digress. Victoria and Lucy have now died. Great, interesting death scene. Just when vampires tend to die, just see like they age up, they flake, and everything like that. So with them gone, now we only have the master of the house, Walter. Walter is obviously like recovering, But Mr. Field is not out yet. He is still a contender as well. So he pops him, and he's got a metal spear, and he like jabs at Evie, and he's like, "I'm gonna cut your head off," and everything. And I'm just thinking, shit, Mr. Field. I hope we're not related. Like this isn't good. This isn't good for the family name. And so she breaks the spear and like cuts him in the chest and all that, and he's down for the count and out. And I'm thinking, shit, like, man, Evie found her ancestors or relatives. I hope he's not one of my relatives, but she goes off, and then all of a sudden, like, the Lord of the Manor Walter just like jumps at her, and this is where you can see, okay, he is clearly a vampire. He's not looking so hot. His face is going vampiric again and everything like that. He's got the long vampiric fingers, and yeah, he jumps at her. She's obviously got him in a better position because he was stabbed already. He's weakened because she sucked a good like quart of his blood out, and yeah, she basically just kicks his ass, kicks him back into the fire where he's burning, and then that basically relinquishes the, I don't want to call it a virus, but the curse in her. Now, we learned too that if she was full vampire, then she would have died, but she was only a halfling, I believe is what Victoria called her. So it just eliminated the virus in her, and she was basically human again, which is great. Now she knows, okay, that's been dealt with, and we got our badass ready or not kind of end sequence here. And then we see, okay, she's meeting up with her friend, and they're basically going to go and hunt down the members of her family. You know, fuck these people. And that's basically where it concludes. Aside from that, I think that basically just covers the whole storyline. Again, scenery and the way they executed the vampires, I really liked the look of them. They were super, super exciting. There were some creepy sequences with like crawling on the walls and stuff like that, but overall, I thoroughly really did enjoy this movie, and I'm excited to go in and watch it again. Not in theaters. I don't think you need to see it twice in the theatrical sense, but I feel, again, like I said at the beginning of the show, there's gonna be a few people that probably will thought like, I wish I actually watched it sooner. Like it really wasn't that bad. And it wasn't. It was a good time. I had a lot of fun watching it with my wife, and I think like definitely if you have a friend or a significant other, you can dive into it with and enjoy. Like pop it on for an evening, enjoy like a little bit of a wild movie, put some popcorn on or get some pizza and just kick back and relax. But yeah, I think Natalie Emmanuel, who's playing as Evie, did fantastic. Thomas Doherty, who played as Walter, was great. Sean Pertwee, who played Mr. Field, fantastic. Everyone, all the actors and actresses, I really enjoyed. And yeah, so it's another vampiric movie that I will be adding to my vampire list of rewatches. It's not up there with the greats like Underworld or Van Helsing, but it's on the list nonetheless. And without further ado, I think that pretty much closes out this review. So I hope you enjoyed it. I've felt like I was kind of rusty. I used to pop off on the solo reviews all the time when we just be getting some wild, wacky horror movies that be coming out back in the day, like in the Conjuring verse and all that jazz. But it's been a good minute since I've come in and done a solo review, so it feels good to be back and diving at this. So again, thank you for your time. And like I said, all the plugs at the beginning of the episode. Find us with our internet connection, the search bar, GeekVerse, anywhere you Google there. And yeah, we'll see you next time. Take care and have a good one, everybody.